South Dakota Territory, August 1879, the first time Quince Johnson saw her, she was standing alone outside the burned-out shell of a sod house, her dress torn, soot streaked across her cheek, and a rifle gripped tight in her hands like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Quince reined in his horse, the Lakota pony snorting beneath him. He had been sent by the army to guide a supply train through Oglala country, but he'd taken a detour when he saw the smoke rising. Now he stared at the girl, maybe 20, maybe younger, but her eyes were older than they should have been. She did not flinch when he approached. She just watched him silent, like she had already decided whether he was a threat. "You alone?" he asked. She nodded once, jaw tight. Her dark hair was unbraided, tangled across her shoulders, her lips pressed together like she was holding back too much. "What happened here?" he asked. "They came 2 nights ago," she said. "Took the food, set the house on fire, left me." Her voice caught, then steadied. "Said I was no use." Quince dismounted slowly, keeping his hands where she could see them. "Who were they?" "My uncle and his sons." Her voice was bitter. "Said I was another mouth to feed, that I always was the unwanted one." Quince looked past her to the charred frame of the home. A small grave sat nearby, fresh earth mounded in a square. "Your folks?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Died last winter, fever." He did not ask more. Her grief hung thick in the air between them. "I'm Quince," he said. "Scout for the army, but I was born Lakota. My father was Oglala. My mother was white, rode both trails growing up." She blinked as if unsure what to make of that. Still, she lowered the rifle. "I'm Kenzie Gallagher." "Kenzie," he repeated, tasting the name. "You got anywhere to go?" Her mouth lifted, not quite a smile. "No." He looked up at the sky, then back at her. "You should not stay here. Come with me. There's a camp west of the river where I stay when I scout. You can rest there, eat, decide what to do next." She hesitated. "Why would you help me?" Quince tilted his head. "Because I know what it is to be left behind, and you look like you could use a fire to sit beside." Kenzie lowered her eyes for a long moment. Then she nodded. By sundown, they had crossed the river and reached a small clearing tucked against the slope of a hill. His camp was simple, just a lean-to built from fallen branches and canvas, a circle of stones for the fire, and a bundle of supplies wrapped in hide. Kenzie sat close to the fire, her hands outstretched toward the heat, silent. She had not spoken since they left the ruins of her home. Quince cooked quietly, boiling beans with dried meat. He handed her a tin plate. She took it, murmured a quiet thanks, and ate like someone who had not felt full in weeks. Afterward, she leaned back against her bedroll and stared into the fire. "I was born in Kansas. My mother died giving birth to me. My father moved us to Dakota when I was 2. He married my aunt after that. When he died, they kept me because they had to, never let me forget it." Quince nodded, listening. "I tried to help. I sewed, I hunted, I watched the babies, but I was always wrong. Too loud, too quiet, too slow, too strange." She looked up at him. "You ever feel like no matter what you do, you are always in the way?" Quince's gaze didn't waver. "Yes." They sat in silence again after that, but it was not sharp like before. It settled around them, warm as the fire. By the 5th day, Kenzie moved easier. Her wounds, bruises, and a twisted ankle had started to heal. She helped gather firewood, cooked rabbit with prairie onions, and mended one of Quince's shirts without being asked. "You do not have to keep fixing things," he told her one evening as she handed him the shirt. "I like doing it," she said, her cheeks flushed. "Feels like I belong to something, even if it's just a shirt." He looked at her a long moment. "You do belong, not to that place you came from. But you belong somewhere." She dropped her eyes. "Where? Right here if you want." Kenzie stared at the fire. "Nobody's ever said that to me. I mean it." She looked at him then, really looked. "Why do you care?" Something shifted in his face. "Because when you walked out of that burned house, I saw someone who had every reason to give up but did not. That stays with a man." She swallowed hard. "I do not know how to trust that kind of kindness." "Then learn it slow." He reached out, not touching her but offering his hand between them. "I will wait." Kenzie stared at his hand, then placed hers in it, just for a moment. Her fingers trembled. They stayed near the camp for another week. Quince taught her how to track deer, how to listen to the wind. She showed him how to make cornbread from ground meal she had salvaged. They laughed more. The silence turned easy. On the 10th night, thunder rumbled across the plains. Quince helped her tie the canvas tighter against the wind. Inside, they sat close, the space between them smaller than before. "You miss anyone?" she asked. He nodded. "My father. He died when I was 16. A good man, taught me how to ride, how to track, how to hold my tongue when the world gets loud." Kenzie looked at him, her eyes soft. "He sounds like someone who saw you." Quince turned his head. "He did. And now I see you." She reached out, hesitant, then rested her hand on his arm. His breath caught, and when he looked at her, the storm outside was forgotten. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I am not going anywhere," he said, and then, slowly, he leaned in. Their lips met, gentle at first, then deeper. She pressed into him like she had been waiting her whole life to be held like this, like she mattered, like she was seen. When they pulled apart, she whispered, "I do not want to go anywhere else." "Then stay," he said. "Stay beside my fire. As long as you want." Kenzie nodded, her hand still on his chest, and for the first time in her life she felt wanted. The wind had shifted by morning, carrying the scent of wet sage and turned earth. Quince stirred the ashes of the fire until they glowed again. Kenzie crouched beside the stream below the rise, scrubbing a shirt against the rocks, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her braid still damp from washing. She didn't hum, didn't speak, but her movements had rhythm now, a quiet steadiness that hadn't been there before. Quince watched from a distance, one knee bent, his coffee cooling beside him. She had taken to the land faster than he expected, not with ease but with stubbornness. She asked about animal sign, about the rings inside cottonwood trees, about storms and stars and the shape of a crow's wing in flight. She didn't ask about her past, and he didn't offer questions. When she returned to camp, she laid the shirt across a branch and wiped her hands on her skirt. "There's a trail west of the creek. I saw boot prints, 2 sets. Quince stood, setting his tin aside. "Fresh, maybe yesterday." She paused. "One of them dragged a foot. The prints were deeper on the right." He raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "I'm sure." "Good eyes." He picked up his rifle and checked the chamber. "We'll take a look. Won't go far." They followed the trail into the cottonwoods where the ground softened underfoot and the light filtered green through the branches. Kenzie pointed out the tracks when they reached them, kneeling beside one and brushing away loose soil. Her fingers worked lightly, careful not to disturb too much. Quince crouched beside her. "You know, most folks don't notice that kind of thing even after years out here." "I watched animals when I was little," she said. "Figured if I knew where they were going, I could keep out of their way. That ever work, sometimes." Her voice was quiet. They moved on, following the trail until it faded into stone and grass. No sign of danger lingered, but Quince kept his rifle close. On the way back, they climbed a rise and paused at the top. The sky stretched forever, pale blue and cloudless. Below, the prairie rolled toward the horizon, gold and green, broken only by clusters of trees and the glint of the river. Kenzie shaded her eyes. "You ever think about settling somewhere, building something?" "I've thought on it." "What stopped you?" He looked out across the land, jaw tight. "I never had reason to stay in one place." She didn't answer, just nodded and turned back toward camp. That night, she made something different: cornmeal boiled into dumplings and dropped into a pot with dried berries and honey water. The taste was sharp and sweet, and Quince leaned back, surprised. "Where'd you learn that?" "My mother's sister made it once. I only saw her twice, but I remembered the smell. Took a while to guess the rest." He chewed slowly, then set his bowl down. "You remember everything." Kenzie glanced at him. "Only the good parts." The fire crackled between them. She tucked her legs beneath her, her eyes on the flames. "Before the house burned," she said, "I used to walk out past the fence at night, just to breathe. I'd look up at the stars and pretend I was somewhere else, not even far, just not there." Quince didn't speak. He reached across the space and rested his hand over hers. She didn't flinch. "I don't feel like I have to pretend anymore," she said. "You don't." Her fingers curled around his. "I want to learn the land the way you know it, Not just to survive, to understand it, he nodded slowly. Then we'll start tomorrow. I'll take you up to the ridge where the deer bed down, show you how to read the wind before it shifts. Kenzie's voice was soft. All right. They stayed like that for a long while, hands joined, firelight dancing in their eyes. Neither said anything more. Words would have only lessened what already passed between them in the dark as the coals cooled and the night settled in. Kenzie leaned her head against his shoulder. And this time she didn't ask what came next. She already knew. The ridge lay 2 hours north on foot, a slow incline scattered with buffalo grass and stunted pine. Quince led the way, rifle over his shoulder, his gait sure across the uneven slope. Kenzie walked behind him, her boots worn thin but steady now, her breath even despite the climb. They crested the rise near midday, where the land fell away into a shallow basin. A stand of cottonwoods clung to the edge of the stream below, their leaves rattling in the breeze. Quince crouched and pointed to a patch of flattened grass tucked under the trees. Deer come down early before the sun hits full, he said. See the way the grass curves, that's where they bedded down. Wind comes from the west here, so they keep their backs to the creek. Kenzie knelt beside the impression, brushing her fingers across the bent stalks. I wouldn't have noticed. You would have given time. He straightened and scanned the horizon. You've got patience. That's harder to teach than sign. They stayed still for a long while, watching a hawk circle far overhead. Kenzie sat with her arms around her knees, eyes following the bird's slow arc. You ever think about where your mother came from? She asked, voice low. Quince's jaw shifted, eyes narrowing slightly. She was born in Missouri. Her father ran freight mules. She said she learned to shoot before she could write. Did she want you to live this kind of life? She wanted me to know how to make my own way. That's all she cared about. Kenzie picked up a thin stone and turned it in her hand. I used to think I had to earn everything: kindness, a place to sleep, even silence. Like I had to prove I was worth the space I took up. Quince sat beside her, resting his elbows on his knees. You don't feel that way now, not here. She looked over at him. Not with you. The quiet between them felt settled, like a held breath finally released. A few minutes passed before she asked, Do you ever miss being among your people? I ride through Oglala land sometimes, when I can. But I've always stayed between, not fully theirs, not fully white. He glanced sideways. It used to bother me more, and now, he shrugged. Now I figure I'm just myself, that's enough. Kenzie smiled faintly, something softer in her eyes. That sounds like peace. Quince didn't answer, but his hand brushed hers where it rested on the grass. She didn't pull away. The descent back to camp was slow, the light slanting gold through the trees as the sun began its fall. That evening, Kenzie took over starting the fire. Quince watched her build it from flint and dry moss, her hands sure, her face lined with focus. When the flames caught, he said, You've been watching. Every little thing, she said, brushing ash from her skirt. I want to know how to live out here. Not just visit. You already are, he said quietly. Later, as the stars began to show, she pulled a folded piece of paper from her satchel. It was creased and worn, the ink faded. My father wrote this before he died, she said. I never showed it to anyone. He took it gently when she offered it. The writing was shaky but clear, a few lines, no more. A note saying she was brave, that she didn't need to be like anyone else to belong somewhere. He never said that out loud, she murmured. Not once. Quince handed it back without a word. She folded it again and put it away. I think he saw it in you, he said. Kenzie looked at him, her gaze steady. You see it too? I do. She reached for his hand, not tentative this time. Then I'll believe it. The fire crackled between them, and this time when she leaned against his side, it wasn't out of need. It was choice. Quince wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her in, slow and certain. You're not just beside my fire anymore, he said. You're part of it. Kenzie closed her eyes, her breath against his collarbone, and the stars overhead blinked into their quiet places. They didn't speak again that night, but everything that mattered had already been said. The first frost came early that year. silvering the prairie grasses and crisping the edges of the cottonwood leaves. Quince had patched the lean-to with fresh hides, and Kenzie had sewn a lining for their blankets from old flour sacks she'd traded for at a supply cabin 2 days' ride east. The wind found every seam, but inside the shelter, their breath rose warm in the half-dark. Kenzie stirred before dawn, the cold biting at her cheeks. She slipped on her boots and stepped outside, the horizon still faint and blue. Quince sat a few paces from the fire pit, sharpening a blade, his breath clouding in the cold. "I didn't hear you get up," she said. "Didn't sleep much." Elk moved through the trees after midnight. They were loud enough to wake the dead. She crouched beside him, arms wrapped around her knees. "You think they'll stay close? Maybe. If the wind holds east, we'll find their beds by noon." She nodded, rubbing her hands together. "I want to try the bow again today if we find them." He set the blade down. "You'll carry it yourself this time. No more guiding your hand. I wouldn't want it any other way." He watched her a moment, then stood and added a few dry branches to the coals. The fire crackled to life, chasing the chill from the air. Later, when the sun was high, they reached the edge of a draw where snow had gathered in shallow drifts. Quince knelt and touched a dark patch in the snow, then pointed to a set of hoof prints leading west. "Bull. Big shoulders. Dragged one hoof." Kenzie followed the sign with her eyes. "Is he wounded? Maybe just old. Either way, he'll move slower." They moved in silence, her bow slung across her back, his rifle resting against his shoulder. A hawk called once from above, then the land quieted. When they crested the next rise, Quince held up a hand. Below, the elk stood among a stand of young pines, steam rising off its back. It turned its head as if listening, but didn't bolt. Kenzie eased the bow from her shoulder, fingers steady. She knocked the arrow and slid forward on her stomach, the dry grass whispering beneath her. Quince didn't speak, didn't move. She drew the string back, slow and smooth, then let it fly. The arrow struck just behind the shoulder. The elk stumbled, took 2 steps, then fell without a sound. Kenzie didn't stand right away. She stayed there, breath held, until the stillness settled again. When she rose, Quince met her halfway down the slope. "Clean shot," he said. Her eyes searched his face. "You think he suffered?" He shook his head. "No, he fed the land a long time. You honored that." They worked together to dress the carcass, packing the meat into bundles wrapped in hide. It took most of the afternoon, and they returned to camp with their backs aching and their hands stiff with cold. That night, as the fire burned low, Kenzie sat across from him, her legs tucked under her. "I never thought I'd be strong enough to take a life like that." "Not for any reason." "It's not about strength," Quince said. "It's about knowing what it costs." She nodded, then looked past him toward the dark edge of the trees. "I used to think the only way to keep anything was to hold it tight, like it'd be taken if I let go, but all this. It's not something you can trap, it's something you walk beside." He studied her, his brow softening. "You've changed." Her mouth curved, not quite a smile. "No, I just started listening better." He reached across the fire and held out his hand. This time she didn't hesitate. She rose, stepped around the flames, and knelt beside him. "You've been sleeping on the cold side of the lean-to," he said. "That's not right." She tilted her head. "What are you asking?" "That you stay beside me, not just for the night, for good." Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. "You sure you want that?" "I've never been surer of anything." She leaned in, her forehead resting against his. "Then I'm yours." They settled into the shelter side by side, the firelight casting long shadows against the canvas. The wind whispered through the trees, but inside the world was still. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The space between them was filled with something steadier than words, a promise lived, not spoken. By late October, the trees shed their gold down to bare branches, and the wind carried the promise of snow. The meat Kenzie and Quince had cleaned hung in the smoke shelter, cured and wrapped in muslin. She'd spent long hours stitching soft linings into their coats, using old scraps of rabbit hide and homespun she'd bartered for with a family passing through. She'd learned to keep her fingers warm by tucking hot stones into her pockets when she worked. That morning she was kneeling in the snow-dusted grass, setting a line of snares near the tree line. The air was sharp, but her movements were sure and unhurried. Quince stood a few yards back, watching her tie off the final loop with practiced fingers. "You've got the spacing right," he said once she stood and brushed off her skirt. "They'll follow the run under that log once the snow deepens." "I watched the rabbits move through here 2 nights ago," she said. "Didn't want to scare them off too soon." He nodded. "You're thinking ahead." "I've been thinking a lot lately," she added, glancing toward the camp. "About what comes next." Quince waited. He never rushed her. "Your work with the army," she said. "You still planning to keep it at once the freeze lifts?" "I was," he answered. "But I've been weighing things." She looked up at him, cheeks pink from the cold. "And?" "I've spent most of my life riding from one place to the next. I never figured I'd stop moving, but I never had a reason to before now." Kenzie's breath caught, but she didn't speak. "I've traded news between outposts, led supply teams, kept men from getting themselves killed in places they didn't understand. I did it because I knew the land, and because it kept me at a distance from things I didn't trust myself to want." He looked at her then, fully, his voice steady. "But you changed that. You didn't ask me to. You just stayed, and now I want to stay too." She studied him, snowflakes catching in her lashes. "There's a cabin north of here," she said quietly. 3 miles past the ridge, tucked near the hollow, belonged to a family who moved on last spring. I traded some sewing for the key from the man who keeps their store in town." Quince blinked. "You never said." "I wanted to be sure before I brought it up. It's sound, needs patching, but the roof holds. There's a stove, a real one. I thought maybe we could make something of it." He stepped closer, voice low. "You thought we might live there." "I did," she said. "If you wanted." He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I do." Later that day, they packed the bundles they'd prepared over the past week's jerked meat, dried roots, a tin of coffee, the handful of belongings they'd chosen to keep. Quince rolled the canvas of their lean-to into a tight bundle. Kenzie tucked the small letter from her father into a tin box, tied shut with cord. The walk to the cabin was quiet, the land open before them. When they reached the clearing, the sun was just tipping low, lighting the snow along the roofline in gold. The door creaked when she opened it, but inside it felt dry, the air clean with the scent of pine and ash. They worked together without needing to speak, Quince chopping wood outside while Kenzie swept out the corners and unshuttered the windows. She lit the stove with hands that no longer trembled, and soon the scent of coffee filled the room. That night, they lay on a mattress made of straw and stitched ticking, wrapped in the blankets she'd lined by hand. The fire crackled in the stove and the wind outside passed harmless against the walls. "I didn't think I'd ever want something like this," she whispered. "I didn't think I'd deserve it," he said into the space between them. She turned toward him, her hand pressed against his chest. "You do." "We both do." He kissed her then, slow and certain, and she answered with the same quiet fierceness that had carried her through fire and frost. The weeks that followed passed with the rhythm of the land. They repaired the shutters, built shelves from cut pine, and added a second chimney stone by stone. Kenzie traded mended shirts for flour and salt. Quince carved a cradle from leftover boards, though neither of them spoke of it aloud until spring, and by then she was already showing. In early May, the first green pushed through the thawed ground, and Kenzie planted beans, carrots, and a single row of sunflowers behind the cabin. Quince built a fence from fallen cedar, and every evening they walked the perimeter together, watching the light fade across the prairie. One morning, as she poured water into the wash basin, Kenzie turned to where he sat at the table drawing a map of the valley. "I never asked," she said. "What would you have done if I'd said no, if I hadn't wanted to stay?" His pencil paused. "I'd have waited. How long? As long as it took." A smile touched her lips. "Good thing I said yes then." He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Best thing that ever happened to me." They stood like that for a long while, the morning sun warming the floorboards, the world outside hushed with new life, years passed. The land changed in slow, familiar ways. A boy was born first, then a girl 2 winters later. They grew strong, lean from sun and wind, their hands quick and kind. Kenzie taught them to sew and to listen. Quince taught them to track and to wait. The cabin never stood empty again. On summer nights, when the stars blinked bright overhead, Kenzie and Quince sat on the porch, her hand resting in his, their lives stitched together not by luck, but by every hard-earned step they'd taken to reach this quiet place, and they never left it. Not once.